the more you just look at only websites, the more you're just going to make websites that look like other websites.
How would you describe the self-aware style?
We spent so much time.
That website ignited something in me where I was like, oh.
In those early years, who were the first clients that you were working with?
I think any freelancer can relate to the feeling of like, am I going to make my bills next month?
You told me at least 3 or 4 times that I don't charge enough at Rogue. Today on Loki Legends, I am joined by Jenny Heintz and Mike Wagz, the founders of Self-Aware, a design and technology studio based in Philly and established in 2018. Partners in life and business, Jenny and Mike focus their synergistic skills on bringing brands to life online, creating fun and dynamic solutions that are both beautiful and performant. They have worked with a variety of organizations and institutions, big and small, from local businesses like Middle Child to major institutions such as the Institute of Design in MIT, and they've worked with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's production company, Artist Equity. Jenny and Mike share how and why they decided to publish their Notion doc, every project we ever charged for. Shedding a light on how they price creative work, we explore the idea of transparency in business and how it breeds conditions for open conversation, trust, and a healthier industry. This was a really fun episode for me because I got to reconnect with old friends and reflect back on a time we were both starting our studios back in Boston and see how we took different approaches to business and work. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode and conversation with Mike and Jenny. Mike, Jenny, thank you so much for being on the show. It's pretty amazing because we both started our studios roughly around the same time. I was freelancing. I know you guys were freelancing and then came together collectively. But I wanted to run it back to 2017 when I first met Mike in Brookline, Boston, and kind of compare and contrast. And maybe that'll be a theme of the entirety of the episode to see each of our agencies' trajectories and where we kind of landed, and basically how uniquely different both of our studios are in the markets that we serve, even though we kind of grew up in a similar culture, and how kind of like our aesthetics and styles kind of are drastically different. So the question in there, that long rambling, is, can you walk us through kind of the early formation and foundation of your studio and kind of what made you want to even work together in the first place?
Taking it back to Brookline, in Boston. So Mike and I met when we were in college. We're both in the design program together. And at the time, I personally felt a ton of imposter syndrome. We weren't at an art college or anything. It was a big research university. I had a lot of friends who weren't designers.
Most of our friends are.
Yeah, just a really wide community there. I kind of felt like I could do anything really. And then I stumbled into the graphic design program. And when I met Mike, that's when I really honestly started to feel supportive and supported, I should say. And just there's this new creativity unlocked, and it's just the minute we met, we were immediately collaborating and started working on projects together. And we were actually in what I would call a performance art class.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really fun way to meet someone.
Yeah, the class was called 5D Experience and Drawing. And it was, I think they've changed the name as part of the curriculum since then. But basically in that design program that was 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D. And so I guess they're calling the fifth dimension experience and experiential art. And so it was less so in this studio course, it was less let's design websites, but it was more thinking about experience in the context of art and performance. And so there were opportunities to pick our partners for the projects in that class, and we would naturally gravitate towards one another. Just honestly fell in love really quickly. So one of our first projects was having to reimagine an everyday object and like completely change its purpose. And we had this strange idea to like buy like a small bicycle off Craigslist. We bought it off this like kind of legendary used bike salesman named, I think, Kenji, right? who lived in Jamaica Plain.
Yes.
And
went down into his basement.
Went down into his like weird bicycle cellar.
Which I was like, we might die, but this is really fun.
And we hacksawed and like modified this bicycle and turned it into an egg beater, which we were able to like do a like live performance in the class of like actually beating an egg with this like absurd bicycle contraption you like turned on its side. So that's like, I don't know, that's like, I feel like when I look back at that, I think it brings us both so much joy because like I feel like what we're doing now is like just still in the same spirit of that, like being playful and experimental, but like somewhat practical too.
Yeah. And neither of us like wanted to make websites at that point. It really wasn't on my radar at all. I actually really hated doing web design in college. I don't think I saw like the websites that I see now. I wasn't like running into things that really inspired me. I think back then it was like 2015. The web was still very different, honestly. But yeah, in that class, it kind of was just like such a natural progression to where we are now. And I think our final project was actually we had to make a website that made the user feel an emotion. And neither of us really knew even how to code at that point.
Yeah, so kind of taking it way back to like, this is 2015, and like I was just learning how to code at that point.
Yeah, and we came up with this whole thing of, we want people to feel, honestly, like kind of like ASMR, but that wasn't even a thing either. But
the word for it.
Yeah, we wanted people to feel like cozy and happy and satisfied, so we were kind of creating all these little interactions, like popping bubbles,
like sound effects.
And then I'd say from there, I think Mike was always really good at this, was like connecting with people and being like, oh, like we'll make you a website. And I was like, we don't know how to make websites. Do it. He would be like talking to people at our university, like different departments. He's like, I'll make you guys a website. And he like didn't know really anything about doing that. You want to chime in?
Yeah, I don't really know what I was thinking, but I guess I was really like obsessed with learning to code, like outside of my like coursework. So I was always just like watching YouTubers and like, you know, trying to like practicing and learning. And so I don't really even know what it was, but I just like really wanted to like learn by doing. So yeah, like a really funny example of that is there was this actual like university department that needed a website, and I was connected to them. And I was just like, yeah, I'll design and build you a WordPress site. And that was how I learned how to make a WordPress theme. So
well, I think like everything kind of like happens and falls into place for a reason. I'm sure there's like some entrepreneurial spirit inside of you that made you want to reach out to those people for sure, and also fall into the studio. But correct me if I'm wrong, but if my memory serves from our first meeting, Mike, at some coffee shop in Brookline, that I feel like you had told me a story about you kind of stumbled into coding, but originally were doing like an internship for music or engineering.
Technically, my degree is in the music industry. And I did it, and I met Jen through this design minor that I did. So growing up, I was always playing in bands. I grew up as a drummer, and there was even a point when I thought I would maybe try to go to school for like jazz performance. And I'm honestly glad I didn't. But anyways, like I was led to like into the music industry. And so a majority of the internships that I did throughout my like undergrad were like in the music industry, working as an intern for Glass Note Records in New York and London. But anyways, and like, I think that the thing that actually like looking back that really like drew me to music, the music industry side of things, was like actually not really like the marketing and industry aspect of like the business of music, but more so like the brand and experience around an artist. So that's like just everything from the artwork, the styling, the videos, the website, like everything, every touch point. And so like I remember like expressing that passion at some of my like early like interviews, and I'm sure they loved that. But then actually getting the experience of working as an intern in these companies, I was like, oh wait, that's not really the type of work that goes on here. Like it's you're not like, you know, I did get to do some design for the labels, different artists, like one of the posters like in the Tube in London, which was super cool. I didn't really know what I was doing then, but it was still cool to see it. Well, it was probably horrible. But yeah, so I coming out of that second like music industry internship, I just felt really unfulfilled. I was like, this is super cool. Like I get to go to concerts all the time, and you know, everyone's really cool and inspiring that I'm working with. But I wasn't like actually fulfilled by the work that I was doing. And so that's when when I came back from that internship in London, we had just moved in together 2016 in Mission Hill, Boston. And that's when I like really kicked off my like obsession with just like learning to code. Because I was like, I think it was almost just like, I was just like desperate to feel like fulfilled by something. And I realized that I was feeling very fulfilled by coding. And, you know, the first time I ever coded was like making MySpace layouts for my band. So it kind of felt like a natural progression. So yeah, so that was like sort of my origin, and my path into web development and design.
Were you kind of like coaxed along, Jenny, or when was kind of like the first moment that you had that spark? Oh, a website can be cool, interesting, fun. What some of the other words I think you used were like experimentation and emotion. When did all of that kind of click for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as Mike was saying, he kind of came back from that internship and we just moved in together, and he was literally like watching YouTube videos every night. And his workload must have been so low, like so small, because he was always doing this. I was like, I have a ton of homework to do. I don't know how you have this time.
The music industry program was not like a demanding curriculum at all, at least from my perspective.
But I was inspired by what he was doing. But on my own, I can't say if there's like a specific website I remember seeing, but we did end up working on this website for a restaurant, which is someone that we knew at school. And we kind of went into it just being like, let's make this super like different than any other restaurant website we've seen. And I was doing some like side scrolling stuff and like paint textures, and Mike just like made that for me, and I was like, wait, that's so cool. Like thinking outside of, at the time, everything kind of, I just remember everything looking like a Bootstrap theme where like everyone was super into just like the tech boom which is going off, and everyone was into like product design around me. But I felt like making that website really like ignited something in me where I was like, oh, this can actually be really fun, and I can kind of bring in stuff that I do with my like print design and graphic design and try and put that on the web.
Yeah, and even as an artist too, like coming from more of that standpoint. Yeah, I feel like it was like also seeing some of that interactive storytelling around that time too, like that really inspired both of us. Like, I don't know, is that, well, and of course I have to bring up awards if we're talking about this, because that was something that really brought a lot of inspiration to me, and like a reason why I wanted to learn how to like make cool interactions and stuff and code. And so like just through that, seeing like crazy interactive storytelling sites from like Jam 3, stuff like that. And I feel like that's how we connected as well.
Yeah, I think we connected because I didn't know of any developers within the Boston area in general. And I think I was looking to do like a cool portfolio site, and we didn't end up working on that together, but we were just like talking shop and like staying in touch like over the years. And it was through awards that I kind of discovered again that like high interactivity, like storytelling kind of driven stuff. And that's what made me want to go into it. I originally wanted to just do packaging design, and I don't really have like the stereotypical like graphic designer skill set for kind of like churning that stuff out and kind of doing that. So I would just like be working with other people to do that type of work. And then I was like, all right, well, I'm probably not best suited for this from like the hands on deck perspective, but I'm actually really good at thinking about like this web stuff. I'm going to kind of like pivot my whole college portfolio to try and get into this world instead, because I feel like I stumbled into something that I can wrap my head around. And then if I want to do like the branding side or the other stuff, I can work with people and we can have fun and collaborate, and it'll be just like soul nourishing. And then I just kind of discovered that the web stuff was just as equally soul nourishing as well. And it kind of combined all of like those sensory aspects of music. You could do dialogue. It was almost like a video game in a lot of aspects, because you could bring in all that interactivity in media. And I was just like, shit, this is so cool. Like you can actually make cool things, and it's not just like boxes and squares on a screen that you click. And there's like emotion and personality to it.
Going off of that too, like I always felt, especially in college, you know, like not having a lot of money. In Boston in particular, I felt like there weren't really that many places to kind of get things like printed, or at least I didn't know about it. And my college didn't really have those resources. So it always felt like web was such a like accessible place to really like experiment versus print, where you're kind of like putting the money into getting things produced, and there's a lot of logistics that go into that. Whereas I felt like with us, it could be such a like lean process back and forth of getting a website made, and
just like that instant feedback of like I had an idea and I just made it, and now I can see it and I can deploy it and
share it.
It's pretty wild.
The fact that you can kind of like push something out, launch something, and you don't need like to, I guess, proof everything super, super intensely. Like one spelling mistake on like a 10,000 print run is like catastrophic. You know,
like that stresses me out. And Pantones, that stuff always stressed me out too. I was like, I don't know what this is. Is this gonna look good, or it's probably not? Honestly, I'm not good at this. So.
Mad respect to print designers.
But you had mentioned kind of the emotion, the interactivity, the fun. I'm curious, and this is a question for both of you, but I'm going to start with Jenny. How would you describe the self-aware style?
Mike and I actually, we talk about this a lot, and thinking about like studios, if they should have a style or not. I wonder if, I think we think that we don't really have a style, and we do what's best for the client and the project. We're always like, when I have a project, when I take on a project, I want to really understand that brand and like dive into it and do anything that brand asks of me versus forcing my own preferences or whatever I think is cool at the time. I'm sure like there are things that we do that maybe we don't notice is like our style.
I feel like it's an interesting time too to think about the self-aware like style, because we're also currently like kind of exploring like a little brand refresh for self-aware, but pretty much a rebrand, like completely different. But just because like our current sort of, if you look at our website, like that identity has been around since we started in 2018, essentially. It's crazy how long it's been. And so, you know, we're just evolving and changing and thinking about how we want to like represent ourselves, and, you know, what can we do with our own brand that will make us feel more excited about using it and expressing the brand like through social and other initiatives, as opposed to like just posting client work, you know? That's been a really interesting exercise. So I feel like we're kind of like, I would say that we're pretty in touch with like where it's going. I would say that something that we like the thing that we say on our website is like, we bring brands to life online. And so like, I think that if there's like a constant thread through the work is like that we try to always like take something to the next level, like in its digital expression. So like whether that's through like taking in a button and making it really delightful to use, or like reimagining like the entire like structure of the website to better serve the business or whatever it is. It's like I just feel like we're always trying to like breathe life into that brand in the digital world. And that's also led up, I don't know, like we've been starting to talk about this, and it's something that I've been specifically thinking about. It's like, how could we even like improve that message even further of like bringing brands stuff online? So just trying to figure out like, what is like what's like the value proposition of that? It's like, I don't know. I've just been like really obsessed with this, like kind of like thought pattern of like, well, what is it about like breathing life into a brand that actually is valuable to a business? Like, is it digital transformation? I don't know, but I think that that's kind of an important aspect of our practice.
I think what I've noticed within your work at Self-Aware is that there's this essence of like digital playfulness and also something that is, I guess I'm going to say unconventional or different or unique in a way. Like I think about like what you did for Middle Child, like a deli sandwich shop, lunch place, or breakfast spot, depending on the time of day. And you kind of built these like interactive face shapes. They're going to be on the screen for anyone who's watching, but that's very playful. Like is it IOTA website where like you can drag out different parts of the screen and like the 4 letters of the name are in the corners. Like that's very different and playful. There's interactive things that you did for like the Artifact News site that were like interactive and playful. And I'm sure that in that creative process, working with their team, doing the development, that was a fundamental thing that you were thinking about. How do we make this interesting or dynamic or unique? So I guess like, is there a part in your process that you're thinking about that kind of like digital cleverness or playfulness, or is that just something that is like fundamentally baked into like who you are as people, and it's not even like a thought?
I think we always do our best to find like what that little like special like moment is going to be. And I kind of feel like not every site needs it. But like the ones that you mentioned are some of the ones that I feel like we're the most excited about.
Yeah, I think we've managed to attract the clients that react well to that playfulness. And I also think that there's some sites that don't necessarily, maybe they don't come across as very playful as a brand. But I think in my head, the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech, there still is that like injection of like dynamic playfulness in the way we like animate the menu down or play with this like motif of different shape textures over the images, and that's randomized anytime you go to the site. So I think because we attract those brands coming to us, we're able to just do what we do best. I do think that is like a pretty foundational element to our studio and just us as people, is like we don't want to ever take ourselves or this job too seriously. It's just, we want to have fun at the end of the day and enjoy what we're doing.
I think that is part of like what makes really great work, because I've noticed like when I get into the thought process or the pattern of just like thinking about the money and like the business aspects of everything, and it kind of like deteriorates from the joy of just kind of creating, I'm like, oh, that's when the work is the most stale. It's like, okay, how do we make this interesting if it's not interesting? Or what do we do to kind of bring this project back to life or interject some fun or personality into it? I also notice it when I look at like platforms like Awards or Dribble or any of those, Pinterest, insert whatever you use here, and I start down like the comparison kind of game and start thinking about like, oh, they did this, we should do something like that, or like we have to do something that's better than that. It's like anytime there's thoughts like that, I find that the work suffers. It's just like getting out of my own way, making sure the team is more so focused on what it is that the client is doing, why they're doing it, and what makes them unique, opposed to looking at what's around, because that kind of doesn't matter. That doesn't apply to them at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally feel that. Like, the more I think you just look at only websites, the more you're just going to make websites that look like other websites for no reason. Like, as Mike said, like, we both also see ourselves as artists. And lately I've been honestly really inspired, like, looking at Arena and just like other things that aren't websites, whether it be just little like motion design snippets or print from whenever. I actually started making an Arena board called What If This Was a Website, and it's just all things that aren't digital, or they're just like, you know, something that was made in After Effects, but it's like, what if we made this some sort of like UI animation? And like looking at different textures and like how can you bring like real life texture onto the computer screen and make it feel tactile. That's the kind of stuff that's been really interesting to me.
You know what? I feel like I love the word you used earlier, soul nourishing. Like, I feel like that really hits the nail on the head. Like, even more so than fulfillment. Like, yeah, soul nourishment. So cool. But yeah, like that. And I think there's a lot of fun examples of that in our work too, when we like really directly take inspiration from the real world. So going back to the middle child site, which is kind of like one of our first like projects that got any kind of like, you know, exposure or notoriety on the web. There's a hover state that when you hover over like text, all the letters kind of just jump in different directions, rotate up and down, whatever. And we were inspired by like the letter board that they had their manual, how it's like there's the imperfection of like how the letters are laid out on that, like little things like that. Or like even on our website, we have like this little like menu mobile, and it's sort of inspired by like an Alex Calder mobile. We really enjoy is figuring out ways to take real life tangible things and like give them a new purpose as like a UI component or interaction.
You had mentioned that you have this ability to attract clients who are kind of interested in that type of work. And I'm a firm believer in that, like, work begets work, and that you kind of attract the right people to you by putting out the things that you're interested in. But I'm curious, in those early years, who were the first clients that you were working with, and how did you start to kind of make your name? You had mentioned the middle child site got kind of like some notoriety, got some awards in general, and got some kind of, I'm going to say press for lack of a better word, probably attention is a better word. But kind of, can you walk me through kind of how you've been able to kind of consistently get clients who are the right fit and not compromise on maybe a certain set of values along the way in order to kind of maintain those good relationships?
A couple things that come to mind. First of all, luck. Like, honestly, I'm really lucky. Like, I feel like, because, you know, I think any freelancer can relate to the feeling of like, am I going to make my like bills next month? And then like in walks the new client into the inbox and you're like, oh, great, cool. So luck. Also, I would say that, so that luck, we do have that, you know, we do have like prospective clients. We do get leads, which is amazing, without like a ton of like marketing efforts. Another thing is that we're actually pretty selective too. So it's like we do attract people that are really like-minded and aligned with what we do. But in the midst of that, there's also a handful of people that come into our inbox that we just can kind of tell that it's not going to be the best fit. And I think we take that kind of discovery, like intake process really seriously, like screening and just making sure that we're going to, you know, vibe and work well together.
Yeah. I think, starting out, like I said earlier, I credit Mike a lot with, you know, kind of talking to people and being like, oh, I'll make you a website, and just like, you know, running with it. And then when we moved here to Philly from Boston, we just emailed Middle Child and talked to the owner, Matt, and he was just like, yeah, let's do the website. And we just got a gift card, and we really
a bunch of sandwiches.
He was just like really down with the vision, and he always had such a strong vision for his business.
Mm-hmm.
So he like really gave us that creative freedom, and I think that's a big part of it too, is having that trust from your clients, and that's how you end up with the best work in the end. So I think we got really lucky, but that is to say that, starting out, we took on work for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And we had the luxury to do that. And I think maybe it's because we were young and we're living in a city that is pretty inexpensive to live in, and we didn't have very many expenses at the time. So that was also very opportune for us. But really, like, once we started building that portfolio, I'd say things grew pretty quickly, and we were able to talk to a lot of people and see, like, how much are people charging? Like, how much should we be? How much is this work really worth? And I think very quickly we were able to start charging what is the market rate for websites.
Mm-hmm. And another big aspect of this that I'll point out is we had this sort of epiphany. Maybe that's a little bit grand, but we had this moment when it clicked and we realized, wait, we don't necessarily want to market directly to prospective clients, because we were getting so much work through like a referral, or like just through like a peer in the industry, like being like, oh, I'm too busy here, you guys could take this on. And so it occurred to us that if we just like interact with other designers and other developers and other studios and other people in the industry, like there's this like sort of ripple effect that has occurred where like they mention our name in conversation and that leads to work. It's really like I should do like a breakdown, like, but because we do kind of track like how different leads come to us, but it's definitely like I would say it's a pretty solid percentage of the leads that we get are like just a referral from a friend or a peer in the industry. And I'll also point out, like, we've been in this Slack channel spaghetti for a long time, where we've made so many friends, gotten, connected to a lot of great clients through that, and also just learned a lot. Honestly, there's some really talented developers there that I've chatted with extensively, and we've learned together, and it's been amazing. So,
yeah, well, that sounds kind of on par with a lot of other small studios too, is kind of being referred work by other friends and acquaintances in studios. And I love how different that is to Rogue, because like every client I feel like we not fighting for, but like is a new client that's coming from some inbound channel, whether it's Dribble or awards specifically. There's a lot of traction there, because I do track it as well. And we're going to jump at some point to your Notion spreadsheet and kind of that breakdown, because it feels like it ties in. But like knowing where people are coming from is super key. And it sounds like you've done a really good job at connecting with those other people in your network and maintaining those relationships.
It's actually a fun story. Do you remember the site like 2C.Earth from like a few years ago? It's like an incredible climate like storytelling site on like on awards. And the amazing like designer and developer behind that is Jing Fan. She also did the Mala project, the website of that amazing restaurant in New York. That's like a recent project of hers. So anyways, like when I saw 2C.Earth years ago, it blew my mind. Like it was just like the most stoked on a web experience I had been in so long. So I just was like, literally like, Jing, you're like a legend. Like I'm like you're so good. Like holy shit, I'm just in awe of you. And then like I think I invited her to like OK Devs, which is another Slack channel that I'm in, and that's like a lot more of the like creative devs from awards, like that community. And so yeah, so literally just like being like, yo, Jing, you rock. And then like she works for Collins now, and then she was the one who put our name in the hat. And then Collins was like, hey, ID, you should hit up Self-Aware. So that's just a good example of like how like just those small like little things can go such a long way.
And for those kind of collaborations, when you're working either with another agency or taking on work that they had done and passing it to you, how do those kind of relationships go? Because that's always something that I find interesting, because if you're piggybacking off of someone else, maybe they want to have some sort of creative control or guidance, or maybe they're just like, hey, I trust you, you can do it. So where do you find that you're landing in kind of that world?
We fully controlled the project and we interface with the client directly, and that's how we prefer to work. I really like talking to the clients and understanding. I think we have different goals than a branding studio does, and we know, I want to know how people are going to use the website, not just the customer, but the people who have to update it. And like, I want to know what they actually need to run their business. And I don't always find that, like, working through a bigger agency or someone specifically like focused on branding are asking those types of questions. And if it's a whisper down the lane type of thing, we never really get to where we need to be. Like, I need to know where your forms are going to be submitted to.
Yeah.
Like, that's important. That's just as important as how the website looks. And I want to know who's going to be using it and who's updating it. So that's why we really like if we can kind of just have that control versus going through another studio. But at the same time, always love when we can get that brand feedback on the actual visual of the site, and like we want to know if we're accurately conveying their vision of what the site should look like.
Yeah. Yep. Like on Collins or on ID, like Collins did like jump in midway through the design process to kind of like leave some feedback on the design. So that was really, really valuable.
We'll put a pin in that and then jump quickly back to your selective nature for who you partner with, because I think that is also a crucial part of why you're able to kind of make the work that resonates and attracts those clients to begin with. And in sort of your intake and a kind of evaluation of the potential client, what are those fundamental characteristics or values that you're looking for? And are there any kind of like big red flags that are just like, nope, can't work with you because of this? We've been burned in the past, or we've recognized it because of certain reasons.
A few years ago, we actually made a document of like, what are our red flags? What do we look for? And I feel like that it's honestly evolved though. Like, we need to update it because I think some of the stuff has changed.
Yeah, we're big on writing everything down, like our process, even though it's like we're a married couple, but we treat things very like this is a company. We like everything is documented, but we'll get back to the...
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm usually the one who's kind of handling new business calls, like, and in the emails and stuff, I would say are a combo of both of us, especially if I'm like, one of us is really busy. I'm like in the trenches with development or something. Jen will help with that. But I think like the reason why like we write it down is because we tend to be very intuitive. So like there is like an element of that sort of just vibe check, like like I'm just like, and I like I don't know, it's like sometimes I would get on the phone with someone and I just wouldn't feel like myself talking to them. That's kind of an abstract thing.
Yeah.
Like I think the best I always feel the best if like about moving forward with a proposal or going forward and working with someone is if like we have a call and I get off the call and I feel energized and I feel like inspired or, really stoked. Like I just think it comes down to like just getting along as people first and foremost, and then everything else that's good comes from there. Like the good work and everything that like great communication, etc. So yeah, so I think that's probably it for us, is just that vibe check. And then in terms of red flags, do you have any off the top of your head? I would say like sometimes I'll ask someone a question on a call, and then they end up kind of just talking nonstop for the rest of the call, like 30 minutes. And it's hard and I'm the kind of person where it's kind of hard for me to like cut them off. and I feel awkward doing so. So I think that's an example of where I'm like, ooh, this could be tricky. So maybe that's one of them. I don't know. What do you think?
I'd say like unrealistic expectations.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge one.
Anyone who wants something done like extremely quickly and doesn't understand why this takes as long as it does. Actually, I feel like we don't run into too many people like that, but we're always a big proponent of being like, we're not gonna be on call all the time. Like, we don't give our phone number out. There's no design emergencies. We really search for people who like respect our time.
Yeah, that's a great point actually, because now I'm thinking of like weird calls that I've had. Like if you like are driving through like in traffic when you get on a call with us to talk about a project, that's probably a bit of a red flag, because that right. It's like you mentioned respect.
Yeah, that's just not how we operate. I'm not like driving in the airport. Like no shade to anyone.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
It's just not our lifestyle.
We're the slower type.
I've unfortunately worked with some clients that were not a good fit, maybe for the money, or started as a good fit but showed their true colors later. And so it's like, how does that happen? But I don't know how it like. You kind of, well, again, writing it down and kind of understanding the process, writing down the steps of the process. How do I guide them through better? I don't know. I am a big proponent of not placing the blame on them if I know that I could have done things better. So I'm kind of, I am in that camp of like taking self-ownership. So it's like, I'll write down the lessons learned from the project, or do like a post-mortem on each and every project, even though I'm bad about kind of doing them initially in the moment. Sometimes they get scheduled for a month, 2 weeks, or et cetera down the road.
Totally. Like I don't like to be, I like when our clients view us as like a creative partner versus, a hired hand.
Yes.
I mean, like, we charge too much to be perceived as a hired hand. So whenever that does happen, I'm like, well, I don't know why you're trying to get me to like push pixels right now, when it's more about like the overall creative vision and having that trust that we know what we're doing.
You had mentioned trust, and I feel like that's like a big thing that I feel like freelancers especially have to earn that trust in some ways. Maybe agencies have an easier time because it's like, doesn't feel like a dude in a basement, even if it is. So I guess like, what have you done with the studio, with Self-Aware, with your clients that helps to build that trust maybe faster? And maybe it starts with that kind of first initial intake.
We try to be super communicative and proactive. I always think about the word proactive, because when I was a music industry intern in New York, that was like the word of the year, like at the label. And it was like, you can imagine like an old school music exec being like, gotta be proactive, like all the time, repeating that over and over again. So like, that really is ingrained in my head. So I'm always thinking like, how can I be more proactive? And I'm not always great at it, but it's always something that I look back on being like, oh, I could have been more proactive. So I think that being proactive does help build trust. Like you already thought of X, Y, and Z before they even did, like that builds trust. Another thing, I think that we've always taken a lot of time with our proposals, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback on our proposals. And I think that builds trust as well. Just like how clear we break everything down. And then also I think when people do find our Notion, like every project we've ever charged for document, that also builds trust because we're just being transparent. Something
I'd like to add to that is, I think like a lot of people see creatives as, someone that's just like masterminding like in the studio and like very like free spirited. And while like I do think there's merit to that, and that's something that we take time to do as well, we treat our projects it's actually like we always use the same process, and it's always laid out very clearly, and I'm always updating the timeline, and like I want our process to be just so transparent that people always know where we're at and where we're going, and how long something should take. It doesn't always take the time we say. You know, there's things that get in the way of that. But we're just very methodical in that way. And I think that's something that clients actually really like, is like that we can do this creative work, but we have that other side of us that's very organized and just more like we're still very like business minded in the way that we're running our studio.
Yeah, technical.
Yeah.
Which is key and essential. And I think that is one of the places where I faltered with Rogue for a long time, was like we had timelines, but I never like showed them visually, or I used to, and then I would stop, or I'd stop halfway through the project just because like things got busy, or I like got lazy or just forgot. And I think it's just like kind of putting the system into place so you're just always doing it, whether it's like something super easy that you can edit. Maybe you made it in Figma, maybe it's in Notion, whatever tool or platform to make your life easy, just to do it consistently, because it matters to the client, because they're paying a lot of money for something. They want to stay on track. They have goals and budgets that they need to keep track of as well. So it's like a respect thing that I realized, like, oh, I'm being unhospitable and maybe even a little bit disrespectful by not doing a better job at guiding them through.
I think there's like almost like a fear associated with buttoning up the process and being so systematic, because by doing that and setting that precedent early on in the project, you're like basically telling yourself like, well, now I have to keep this up. Right? So there's like, I feel like it's actually kind of scary to introduce a new process or introduce new systems, and because you're like, is this gonna like stick?
Feel like we've touched on it so many times that we have to jump into your Notion doc. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I would have the courage to do what you did. And I know that you had built this so that it was anonymous, but you made a document of every client, every project that you've ever charged for. It gives the context of the industry, it gives the price. But I guess from my perspective, that would take a lot of courage. Did you feel like that was a challenging thing to share? I guess the other side of that question is, what does transparency mean to you? And how do you think that it is a good thing for our industry to kind of help us all to grow?
Well, when Jen publicized that document, it was kind of like I feel like
went rogue.
She kind of went rogue a little bit, which shout out Rogue. Yeah, she did kind of go rogue a little bit, but whenever Jen does that, I'm like, hell yeah. Like because I trust her. So yeah, it got so much kind of traction on Twitter at the time when it was posted, and people to this day will still tell us how helpful it is, whether they're, peers in the industry, people just getting started, students, or prospective clients that are just like, that is so cool that you did that. We've gotten really nothing but good feedback. Occasionally people will say like, oh, like, do you feel like, that's weird to share that stuff? We haven't had any complaints. I think the fact that it's anonymous helps.
I kind of just made that internally just so we could always see the journey. Because, I mean, you could really see how much the project budgets go up versus like when we first started. But something that I was super inspired by when we started Self-Aware was Haraf, who was a studio. I think they probably stopped being a studio like when we were first starting, like in 2018 or so.
Approximately, yeah.
But I was just so inspired by their studio, and they had this sense of play that I kind of like feel like we brought into Self-Aware. And they shared, when they stopped being a studio, they just shared their whole Google Drive, which was just so amazing for someone who was just starting out, because I was like, oh, like, I was like obsessed with how they even just organized their Google Drive.
Like just the structure of the folders.
Like that's such a amazing thing to be excited about. But I was like, I'm going to like organize our business super methodically like this too. And they had a spreadsheet, which is basically the same thing that I published, which is all of their clients and how much they got paid in the industry. So I decided to post that like 2 years ago, and I kind of just believe I don't get that much traction on Twitter. Like I have like a solid group of maybe 10 people who like my tweets. Shout out. But it got a lot more traction than I was expecting. So I kind of posted it thinking maybe 10 people would see it, but it turned into probably thousands of people seeing it. And like we still get views all the time because Notion has like the analytics that you can see. And there's people who reach out and they're like, "Oh, do you mind if I make one based off of your template?" I'm like, "Hell yeah."
Cool.
And I actually saw kind of an interesting conversation on Twitter about this, and kind of like, I think there's some, let's call them design grifters who
let's
share,
get into it.
they share their how much they make, but in a way that's kind of just ego driven. In the conversation there, someone was like, "Oh, I really like the way Self-Aware did this, because it doesn't seem in any way like a brag. It's more as an educational tool." And that's always what I wanted it to be. Like when I saw how much Href was charging, I was like, my mind was blown that we can make that much money making websites. So I hope that there's people out there who are like, see our budgets now and they're like, "Oh my god, that's like, that's a 2-person studio," and they're able to do that. And I hope that's inspiring to people.
There's a couple of questions that come to mind, and one is around kind of the elevating yourselves maybe internally as a studio to feel that self-confidence to charge those prices that you think are appropriate to where you are now. Are you finding anything specific in your data as you're recording it that kind of has helped you to find the right clients or pitch more appropriately? Has seeing like the list and seeing like how it changes from year to year and where you are now influenced kind of anything in your studio process?
Going back to just the idea of like getting the confidence to actually say those prices. I think something that made us more confident to do that is actually doing some big projects for not enough, and realizing like we spent so much time and effort and just brain space, doing this project, and realize, and then you kind of put it into perspective. You think, "Oh, I made this much per week on this," and you're like, "Damn, that's terrible." So I think doing work and realizing how hard it is and how much work goes into producing, doing the website from concept to launch, it's a lot. It could be a lot of work. So that was a huge one. And then further from there, discovered this service called Waka Time. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so it's actually like an extension, like in my code editor, and tracks my time in each file, literally down to the file. So I can go into the dashboard and see, oh yeah, I spent, exactly this many hours on this specific feature, like going down super granular. I would say that we're not great at time tracking outside of that. But I think even just that, seeing like, oh wow, I spent 500 hours on this project, like stuff like that. Or it's like, oh, I spent 40 hours on this one. So you can start to see like a scale and get a better idea of how much to charge. So then you're thinking like, okay, well, how much do I want to make per week or per hour? And then from there, we can look at our sheet and be like, okay, well, what was our average fee last year for a project? So we just look at all the projects divided by how many projects there are, get the average, and then that can inform like, oh, well, maybe that's a sweet spot. So then, yeah, it's like over time we start to be like, okay, so maybe our starting, budget is like around 40K and up. And then we're finding even more clarity on like, what's our sweet spot for timeline? If things can be consistent, I think across projects, it makes it easier for us to like execute and do really good work. Right in the beginning, like via email, if someone didn't state their budget like up front, like we probably would say it something like, to set expectations, we typically charge around this for a website. Like we're pretty upfront about it, and we can kind of go from there and be like, well, if that's workable, then we'd love to continue the conversation. So we're able to like kind of weed out, like before I even get a chance to get like excited and giddy about like the potential of a project, like I can just like kind of like take a step back and be like, is this even feasible logistically?
I'm pretty sure you told me at least 3 or 4 times that I don't charge enough at Rogue.
Really?
That's like 3 or 4 separate conversations. I remember each one. I think like there was one in Boston prior to starting Rogue where I was freelancing and I was like, oh, maybe Mike would want to do something on this. And you were just like, that is pretty low for what you're trying to do. And every single time you said it, it's like I already knew that it was too low, but I didn't know how to get it higher. And I think one of it is like a self-confidence thing where like I'm afraid to say the bigger number because I'm already assuming that they're going to say no, or just it won't fall into place. And it's breaking that cycle where you're limiting yourself from saying the number, because there should be a negotiation when you're charging for things. I mean, in our American culture, we don't really have like a barter back and forth system, but a lot of the world does have that. So it's like, and for some reason, when there's like an exchange of creative goods, there is sort of that kind of negotiating back and forth. And a lot of other industries aren't like that. It's like doctors say a price and that's it. Or like you pay this much for braces or like this much for a mechanic. But it's like learning from those industries and applying the things that are really good to what we do is something that I've been looking at and trying to like diagnose or dissect in a way to get to a creative solution. And so those moments were kind of really big level up moments. And I think now maybe we're finally at the point where I think about the team. I'm like, okay, I think about my team. I think about their families. I think about my wife. And I'm just like, I got to provide for these people. Like, I can't just like, I can't fuck up and charge too low. Like, that's rude to them.
Definitely in the beginning, that confidence was, it was hard to say big numbers. But I think like what has always helped us is just being like, well, this is how much we want to make a week. I think that's the easiest way for me to look at it versus like, per hour or something. But like if we can make this much a week, then we feel good, and our lifestyle, like that's where we want to be with our lifestyle. So when we give someone a price and we give them the time, and then they say, well, can you do it for like 15K less? It's kind of like, well, no, because that's how much we're trying to make per week. So I think what we tend to do is say like, okay, well, for example, oh, you wanted to build this on WordPress. We're a lot faster doing Sanity. So we can do it for 15K or 15K less if you let us build it on Sanity. I think starting to introduce some of those like, okay, or we're going to take away this feature. And if that's something you want to do when you have that money, like we can come back to it. Like treating it more like that has really helped with, I think, just getting paid what we want to get paid.
And I think that also builds trust and respect too, because then you're just setting that precedent of like, well, we're not just gonna like do it for less for no reason. Like that's honestly like confusing to a client. Like you made the metaphor to other industries of like this costs this much money, like it costs this much to get braces or whatever. Like if you go to the supermarket and you say, well, actually, I'm not going to get this box of cereal, you're going to pay less money. So it's like, or if you add more cereal, then you're going to get more, you're going to spend more. So it's like, I think actually like without realizing it, like clients actually like, it's actually probably better for them to be like held accountable for like, oh, if we want to go lower, it's going to probably be like a lower scope. That being said, I actually, when I watched Rachel Yeager's episode of the pod, like she was like expressing how like if it's something that they're really excited and passionate about, that Human is willing to take stuff on and make it work. And that's totally true too. And I like how like just earnest and like candid about that Rachel was, because there's no reason to like hide that. Like, if we're really excited about a project and the potential collaboration, Of course, we'll try to make it work for a little less than maybe we usually would, depending on our availability and, kind of where we're at in the year.
Maybe there's a project where we're actually making more than we expected. Like maybe it's going faster than we thought, and we're actually doing well with that project. Maybe we could take on something that is really inspiring to us, but they have a lower budget, and they're really cool people
who believe in what they're doing.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to, and that you had mentioned, Jenny, was that this charging weekly. And could you walk us through sort of how you think about going from weekly to kind of going to like a project? I mean, I'm sure if you have a weekly rate, you can anticipate how many weeks a project is, and then you basically have a project rate. But what are the other factors going into it that help you to price appropriately, think about your goals for the year or goals for your life or lifestyle that translate into like a project rate?
Like we were like talking all about like being super methodical. But this is actually not super methodical. I feel like we've gotten to a place where we actually are. I'd say a lot of the proposals that we've sent out this year, except for maybe a few outliers, are in that like sort of 40 to like 80 range, right? Maybe a little even lower, possibly. Because I think that what we've kind of realized is like, it's actually like a lot easier to get to win projects that are in that slightly lower range. But like, it still feels like sufficient if we can like do enough of them. Just to backtrack a little bit. When we're like creating a proposal and we get to that budget section, like at that point, we kind of have a sense for like, okay, cool. Like we're going to say 20 weeks. And then we're kind of thinking like, okay, cool. Like what's that, weekly rate that we would like to make on this? And it really varies. And I'd say like, it's kind of like 3 to 6 or something ish, I think.
3 to 6,000, just to put that into context, right?
Yeah. My math serves me. And so like, I'll just do some like basic division and be like, oh, cool. Like we're sort of in that range. We kind of derived that from like thinking about like, oh, how much do we want to work per week? What is like an ideal hourly rate? So there's some like, I would say it's a very loose and basic calculation, but it's not, it's not super like granular. Like I know like I think I read an article from like Sanctuary Computer about their pricing and like going through like using like various like burn rate and like assigning points to tasks and things. And I'm like, that's really cool. I would love to like be more like kind of like deliberate and granular with how we approach the pricing process.
Yeah.
Something that we've thought about.
And then like thinking about outside factors. So we're just the two of us and we are married. And so really the studio is making all of our money. I think it's pretty simple actually. It's just we're not accounting for, even if we were just two people, but we're separate and we had separate families. I think that's a whole other dynamic. But we have the same lifestyle goals. So I'd say like every year we're kind of thinking about, what do we want? And, like we bought a house. So that was like kind of a big part of it, a couple of years ago. And then also kind of just, I mean, we're really, obviously we're kind of trying to like one up ourselves every year. Like, can we make more this year? I'm sure we'll hit some sort of plateau. Last year, we actually had our first year not making more money.
Yeah, it was like a lot less. It was a rough year.
That was that was a big part of having our own business because we never experienced that. It was always up, up, up. And it almost felt like, oh my God, we can't do this anymore. It's going to end. Like, there's going to be no more money.
There's going to be no more projects. Yeah, last year was tough. Like, we were, like, having a lot of, like, existential dread and doubt about what we were doing.
Yeah, but I think we kind of get together, and last year was actually because we had that down year, we decided to have kind of, like, a little business retreat together, which is funny because we live together and we're married, but we've really found that we need to, kind of take a step away from our Philly home life of being a couple and get into that mindset of being like, well, the two of us run a business together and getting away from our house and, you know, our neighborhood really helped us just be like, let's just talk about self-aware, like where we were and where we want to go. And, you know, how much do we want to make in 2024? And how are we going to do that? And what are new things that we can try to maybe get the clients that we didn't end up getting last year? So I think like a lot of, like where it's different for, you know, someone like you, or you have people working for you, and that's kind of like you are thinking about, oh, well, I need to make sure I have the money for them. We kind of think about, oh, like, should we have a kid? And how is that going to change the business? And like, how much more do we have to make? We really like the situation we're in now. Like, we don't really have plans to have more people on board because we really like the flexibility it affords us. And also the weight is taken off, I think, when that bad year comes around and we feel like we can't provide maybe for someone else.
It becomes very complicated when other people are involved. So I think from one perspective, I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, no, I could never work with my spouse because of X, Y, or Z. And it sounds like that isn't the case for you guys because you're very much intertwined and you're interested in the same things. I guess, what are some of those factors or secrets that have led to you being a successful, life couple, but also partners in business?
The first one that comes to mind is it's, I would say kind of a relationship thing, but also probably a business partner thing too. Any collaboration is like, if you're hungry, like don't try to like talk or communicate. Like if you're hungry, like you need to feed yourself and then you can have a productive conversation. So yeah, because I think like some people it's probably a sliding scale for like how hangry people get. But I think I've actually like kind of maybe grown out of it a bit over the past few years. But there was a point in time where my hangriness was just on a different level. I couldn't be productive if I wasn't well fed. So that's one of my tips.
Yeah, definitely. That's an easy tip.
It's such an easy tip.
If you're having relationship issues, like just try and eat and then revisit the
like
problem.
Hydrate. Yeah, those
you never know.
It's crazy.
But so that's one thing. And then I think just going back to it and being like, there are times where you need to separate the relationship, the romantic relationship from the business relationship. And I think there's things that we run into
100%. Well, like
where it's, can you think of an example?
Well, like you'll call me out for like doing like I'll be like whistling or like beatboxing or like singing like really loud like while I'm working.
Yeah, I'm like, would you do that if you weren't with your wife? Like would you do that with someone else? Probably.
And I'm like, God damn, you're still right. So yeah, it's like there's those sort of like reality check moments of like, hold up, like I need to be a little more professional.
And I think also just treating like every Monday, like we have kind of like, I guess it's like our partners meeting. Like we sit down and we say what we're going to get done for the week, and we say what's been. It's actually kind of corny, but we have like our stoked and stressed lists, and we list like 3 things we're really excited about and 3 things we're stressed about. And I think a lot of people in the context of like being a married couple might find that really kind of cheesy, but like it's not really cheesy in the context of being like you're at work and you're like, you need to still have those routines even though you're together and you might already be talking about those things all the time. It's so important to like write everything out.
Yeah. And another thing I'll point out with that is that we've actually lately, the way that it's evolved over the years, but the way that we've been doing it lately is there's the Notion dashboard where we have like our weekly tasks for the business and we have our stoked and stressed lists. And then there's a separate, just literally like computer paper that like Jen writes in like big, like Sharpie. And that's like more of our personal to-do list for the week. So it's like, we kind of do both at the same time, but we separate them. One's like handwritten, more loose, and then one's like on the computer and feels like a work task.
What are each of you doing individually for yourselves? Because if you're with each other all day, every day, for working and lifing, like how do you both individually recharge on your own?
Yeah, I'd say we have a lot of different hobbies that we like to explore separately. We are kind of homebodies, introverted, so it's not as much like going out.
Like we do like to go out and party occasionally, but like yeah, we both really get into our hobbies. Like in the evenings lately, we've both been on this like kind of like cozy gaming tip. I've been like randomly playing like Tetris, like
nice,
online Tetris, like battles and stuff.
Mike gets really obsessed with things.
Yeah, so I like to like learn stuff and like immerse myself in stuff. I would say like when the basketball season was still going on, I would like unwind, like watch a Sixers game or whatever.
Yeah,
so I
like to read, and lately I've always been really I've always loved drawing, but I kind of like lost that as a hobby, and I recently came back to doing it and doing some charcoal drawing, and it like just I felt like I was in high school again. I used to just sit in my room and draw, trying to make like really like realistic looking drawings. So that's been something really fun to do, just kind of on my own. And also bird watching has been a new thing for me. Sitting in the backyard, listening to all the birds.
Jen's great at hobbies. She's really good. She's really good at I guess we both kind of are, but no, I just love when Jen gets into like a really into a hobby. Like an earlier one this year was like learning like some crocheting, right?
Oh, nice.
There's this like line of crochet like things called woobles. So you can like get a little like wooble kit, and it's just like a cute little like
stuffed animal
basically. So like yeah, Jen just like is on her like cozy like hobby.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
No, I think that's important because like I found that half of our, maybe not half, but like whatever percentage insert here, I'd say it's at least 40, is like we have to do interesting things to be interesting people in order to be creative. And at least that's how I feel. Like I feel like if I'm not doing anything, I don't see anything, my perspective doesn't change. I also see that like if I'm like in a music rut, that usually means that I'm not doing something in the world or experiencing culture. Like even just like walking by like someone who's playing Jamaican music and maybe is of Jamaican heritage and immigrated to the United States, like that broadens my culture. I can stop and have a conversation and ask like, who is this? Like, can you tell me more about that? And just like taking like that little bit of initiative to like learn something that day or just like talk with some stranger, like helps me to expand my worldview and horizons. And I find like, if I'm not doing that, I very much notice because I'm like very much the same and have the same thought patterns. And
I really like what you said about music, because I've felt the same way. Like there's some times where I'm like not discovering anything new, and I don't even really find myself listening to it when that's something that I know Mike and I both really love music. It's always kind of like a sign of like lack of inspiration or like maybe even lack of going out of just like my comfort zone of what I'm used to listening to. Because there's sometimes I can just fall back on listening to the same favorite like 2 or 3 favorite artists and just like repeat the record.
Yeah, it's like I can like point to like, oh, that year was like, man, there was so much good music that year, and then I also can point to like, oh, that was a really like creative and fun year. So yeah, I never really thought of it that way. It's cool.
Usually at the end of these, when around this time, I like to jump into some fun, fast questions that are like totally just like not related.
We're ready.
I'm curious if niching down to bringing brands to life on the web has hurt or helped your business, and how you kind of think about niching as a studio.
I think it's helped, both for our clients to understand what we do and for us to be able to be consistent. Because I think just as a 2-person studio, it's nice to just have like one kind of offering and be able to repeat that. Because I think it could get really hard to juggle a lot of different offerings and processes and services or whatever, like just as a 2-person team. And then in terms of niching down further, it's something that we've actually been talking about and exploring. Because prior, like, and to this day, we've always kind of just been like, we work with like a wide variety of individuals and organizations across many different industries. But I mean, I'm not going to necessarily specify what we've been considering.
Yeah.
But we have been considering being a little bit more specific about the types of industries that we like working in the most.
Yeah, I think it gets scary because like I don't want to weed out something that could be amazing,
right?
Because my website says I only do these things. It's actually kind of funny though, because we still get so many requests to do like a brand as well.
Sure.
Even though I thought it was kind of clear that we just do websites. We do at the same time. I don't think it's clear. I guess not. At the same time, we did do like, Middle Child opened like a bigger restaurant. So we did the branding kind of piggybacking off of their original brand. We expanded to their restaurant and we helped with that brand. And we are actually taking on a couple of projects this year that are just like smaller branding exercises. And we've been thinking about like, okay, how can we kind of package it so that we're making a brand, but we're using the website as the vehicle for the brand. It's like people that don't really need too much print or maybe not even that much like photography
or even like a ton of like strategy or whatever, like just like kind of going like really lean and just leaning into like what's going to be an amazing like digital experience, and then going out from there. It's like, well, here's the typefaces and the like here are the systems and the word mark or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So we have something coming up that's going to be like that, like an architectural firm that we're going to be kind of like using the website process as a vehicle for that brand identity. So that'll be cool. Yeah. So we have been experimenting too a little bit, maybe even opening up.
Having it be niche and having those connections and then doing more for those clients that you already have like a relationship with, or that, you've done a certain amount of the project already and they say something like, oh, we need this too. Like, oh, we can do that. It's just like opening it up in like a beautiful, hospitable way, opposed to like having everything listed and then you have to scramble to figure out how to do those things. That's when I think a lot of people get into trouble. It's like, you should probably have your core set of things that are your superpowers and stick with those, and then kind of branch out and experiment slowly.
I was really inspired by the book Run Studio Run. I read that pretty early into us doing self-awareness.
Yeah, it was probably in 2018 that we got that book.
Yeah, and that was something that they the author runs 100 Monkeys, I think still runs it. But which is like a naming studio, and he just talks a lot about like how just doing that one thing really well and like focusing on like building the studio around that thing can be really beneficial. And that's kind of what really inspired us to just, hone in and try and be an expert in that thing.
How would you describe each of your superpowers, and how does kind of like the business run on the backs of both of you?
I think for me, I'm very organized. I like to keep the project moving. I help Mike actually a lot. Like we'll like sit down and look at all his dev tasks, and I'll just like help him prioritize, trying to figure out the best way to work through things. But then I'd also say like I really thrive on that like creative process, and like in the design process, like really trying to like doing the early sketching of like what the project's gonna be, and then we both kind of go in and like hone in on some of my early ideas.
If I was gonna tell you what your superpower is,
okay,
it's everything you said, and then plus your ability, like what I struggle with as a designer is like pulling ideas out of thin air, like putting pen to paper and designing something. Whereas like if I take something that's already there, I can kind of like tweak it and like iterate on it. But what I find to be Jen's superpower is just pulling amazing ideas out of thin air, like just literally creating something from nothing. Sounds a little corny, but I feel like it's so real and how often she does it, and it's so impressive. So that's Jen's superpower. And then for me, I would say my superpower is probably like the motion stuff, and like the code motion, like, you know, animations and micro interactions. Like it's very natural to me to like think, to just like look at some static design and like see it in motion, and even like probably due to my like musical background, like see even like putting motion, like sound to that too. So I guess it's just that like kind of inherent like time-based medium of like, whether it's audio or visual, like I really like just that's like the thing that's my like bread and butter, is like the thing that got me into coding. So I think it's probably the motion stuff. But from there, I've like grown into like a more well-rounded engineer, where I'm like building more back-end stuff and doing a lot of like content modeling for like CMSs and building amazing editing experiences. So I feel like, although that's like my roots, that like I would say that that's still my superpower.
Yeah. And I think like Mike, what's really good about our collaboration is that like I'll come up with these ideas, but I think then it gets hard for me to like, it's like he's really into the details of the design. And he's able to like add the polish that it needs, whereas I might get a little like tired of working on it at that stage. And he's like really bringing it like to the finish line and adding all these finishing touches that are so like, there's so much attention to detail. Our brains like work differently in that way, which I think is really cool. Yeah,
it's like I think it's just the nature of being a developer too, is I'm always like trying to figure out how we can like take really loose and free flowing and interesting designs and make them systematic and like modular and
complementary skill sets.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, very synergistic in that way. I think that's how the best agencies can stay like doing incredible work, but can still be small and nimble. I think like when you get too big, then you kind of lose a little bit of that, it seems, from hearing from other people.
Yeah, it seems challenging.
Let's completely change topics. What's one book, film, or show that has changed you as a person? And Jenny, since you said you were a reader, we can start with you, but you can take the time to think about it because it's a big question.
Yeah, that's a huge question. So book, film, or
show.
So.
And that could be any type of book. It could be like as simple as like a comic book as well.
Okay. Let me think about this.
And maybe just to put it in your ear, just because you were coming from the music industry, Mike, what's one record that changed you as a person?
I like to read, but I do think TV has inspired me in a profound way. And I'm looking at my top. I have a little TV app where I track.
What is that app?
I track everything I watch. It's actually this really cool app. We went to college with the person who made it, Josh.
Yeah.
It's called Marathon, and I just like track everything. It's kind of like Letterboxd for TV.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm just like looking at my top shows. Okay, my number one show is Better Call Saul, which might be surprising because Breaking Bad gets all the glory. But I'm just so like, I always rave about Better Call Saul to people because it's like the best love story that I've ever watched. And I don't think anyone would expect that from like Bob Odenkirk and what they know about Saul from Breaking Bad. I'm just like a sucker for love and like just like that true like connection between people, and also just like the whole like how everything's filmed. Like you can tell it's very like Lynchian, which we've actually talked about this with Self-Aware. It's like, I'm so inspired by like Lynch and like stuff like How To with John Wilson, this like very vernacular, like just the mundane, the ugly, like just like the normalcy of life. That is just like, I am obsessed with it. I love getting little videos of people being kind of weird on the street, or like yeah, I just love, I love that, and I'm like trying to insert more of that into my own work.
I think that the love story is so unique. It's like not like necessarily how love is like traditionally portrayed in like TV and movies, and I think it's like a really like raw and beautiful love between two main characters. Anyways, I don't want to give any spoilers. So basically, okay, we're talking about music. Well, the first record that comes to mind is "Waking on a Pretty Daze" by Kurt Weill. Do you know that one?
I don't know that one, but I will put it on today.
Yeah, it's like I got into it like maybe like right before I met Jen, and then like was really into it for a long time. Kurt Weill's from Philly. There's actually like a mural that was painted by Stephen Powers, like in Fishtown, like near where we live in Philly, and that's the cover of the album. So I think like even before I moved back to Philly, like I grew up outside of Philly, and then like we got into this record like in Boston, and then we're like visiting friends back here in Philly one time. We were still living in Boston, and it was like, oh, let's go see the mural, you know, and that drew us to like where we now live, and like, you know, have a dog and like own a house and like want to start a family. So it's like kind of this cool full circle thing. And the album's always felt so like just contemplative and beautiful. Yeah, and like Kurt Weill's just amazing. So that's one of my favorite records. It always stands out to me. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I love that.
Wait, did you talk about how we saw him?
Oh, okay, yeah. Another interesting thing is that we went to eat before going to a War on Drugs show in Philly. This is literally in 2015, like a month after we met. And we're walking to the train, and we walked right by Kurt Weill as he still lived in the neighborhood. And we didn't have the like courage at the time to like speak up and say anything. But it was just so weird to like run by him. We were like, wait, that was him. He was literally like
going to see the mural.
Or like going to see the mural, and we're going to see he was an original like early member of the War on Drugs, and we're going to see them. So it just felt weirdly, you know,
profound.
Yeah, that is really profound. So what's the coolest, I guess, like to you personally, the coolest neighborhood in Philly? Because I don't think a lot of people, unless you're from Philly, know the kind of different neighborhoods of and like the makeup of the town. So I wanted to shed a little Philly spotlight and share some love.
Philly's an interesting place. It's very like, a lot of people always call it a city of neighborhoods. And it's different from, I mean, maybe it's not that different from other cities, but like Center City is just like where all the like big, sorry, where all the like, you know, big buildings are. Right smack in the middle, and then you have South Philly and then North Philly, and there's Philly. Kind of like, and West Philly. Yeah, there's think about it. I'm not. I guess I just don't go to West Philly too much, but
city of neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you're in West Philly, like you are in West Philly. If you're in North Philly, you're in North Philly, South Philly. It's kind of like I would say almost like a battle.
It's also a symptom of the horrible public transportation and how it's like weirdly kind of a car city.
Yeah, so we live in North Philly in East Kensington.
And we don't even live in far North Philly either.
No,
it's not super North Philly.
Yeah. I mean, we love our neighborhood. Like, this is where we hang out all the time.
Yeah.
It's right next to Fishtown, which is probably a better known neighborhood. But Fishtown is kind of going under the Williamsburgification.
Yeah, like there's going to be a Starbucks and a Sweet Green and a Shake Shack opening soon. So that's kind of wild.
So East Kensington's kind of like that, like next neighborhood up. That's a little less affected by like the corporate.
Although the gentrification here is insane. Simultaneously, there's crazy amounts of development happening here too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we love it up here, but also like parts of South Philly, we love to go down to like East Passyunk.
Yeah, and like the Italian market is incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of culture down there. There's a huge Italian population down there. So just like a ton of good food and really like the best part of Philly, no matter the neighborhood, is the food.
Yeah, I think that due to the fact that Philadelphia is so close to New York and so affordable compared to New York, you have so many incredible chefs and like restaurateurs and just entrepreneurs, period, coming here to create amazing. Yeah, there's just amazing food here. I think that's like my favorite thing about it is the food scene. And
amazing pizza. Like,
yeah, great pizza.
I'm from New York, like outside of the city, but Philly has some of the best pizza I've ever had. It's just incredible.
I've only heard really good food related comments about the different neighborhoods. And I feel like if you're into like food YouTube, like I feel like there's always like videos about different places in Philly, like local legends kind of things like that.
Yeah.
Before we kind of wrap up officially, are there any kind of closing thoughts, messages, promotions that you want to kind of share going on in the studio? Wise words or wisdom?
I just realized that this is like that moment during Hot Ones when he's like, now it's time
to like, tell everyone what you're doing.
Yeah. What you've got going on. I'm like, oh shit, we should have been prepared for that. But no, like I don't think there's anything really specific to point to on our end right now, but I think we have we're really excited about our new studio space, which is like a few minutes from our house. So we've been working on kind of setting that up, and I feel like there's going to be some fun things to come from that, like whether it's like doing some sort of events there or, you know, rolling out our new brand, which I would say is inspired by having a space again finally. So
yeah, like just you know, follow us and stay tuned.
Cool. Love it. And people can find you on Twitter and Instagram, all the places. I will link it in the show notes below, wherever you are listening or watching that. But I mean, I'm just so incredibly grateful that we could make this happen, that you could come on the show and share not just like your personal journeys and the studio journeys, but kind of share how you can work as a couple, as partners together as well, that you can build your business and you can create a studio that works to better your life and kind of everything around that. I think that's incredibly beautiful and crucial to see. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having us. This is really fun.
Yeah, so fun.
Everyone, remember that we're all legendary and have an amazing story of our own to share. So on the journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind. And let's make the world a better and more beautiful place to live. Jenny, Mike, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.